In the brutal world of the Crusades, kings were forged from ambition, faith, and steel. They were supposed to be symbols of strength, almost godlike figures. But in the 12th century, the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile Christian outpost surrounded by enemies, found itself defended by a king unlike any other. He was a leader whose own body was his fiercest enemy, a warrior who couldn't always feel the wounds he took, and a monarch who wore a crown of thorns long before his reign even began. The Secret Life of Jerusalem's Most Unlikely King. Imagine a 9-year-old prince diagnosed with a terrifying disease that caused him to lose the sensation of pain in his limbs. By all logic, he should have been cast aside, a forgotten footnote in history. Instead, he rose to become a legendary warrior, a brilliant military strategist, and the last great hope for a kingdom on the verge of collapse. This isn't a fantasy story. This is the true story of Baldwin IV, Jerusalem's most unlikely king. Section 1. A Fading Kingdom, a Cursed Prince. The Kingdom of Jerusalem in the 1170s was a candle in the wind. Established during the First Crusade, it was a sliver of Christian rule in the heart of the Islamic world. Its cities were wealthy and its holy sites were sacred, but its borders were constantly under threat. To the east, a new power was rising. The brilliant Sultan, Saladin, who was uniting Egypt and Syria and slowly tightening his grip around the Crusader state. The kingdom desperately needed a strong ruler to face him. Instead, they had a boy. Prince Baldwin, born in 1161, seemed like the perfect heir. He was smart, handsome, and had an incredible memory. He was tutored by one of the most learned men of the age, the historian William of Tyre, who trained him in scripture, politics, and the art of war. Baldwin learned to master a horse like a true knight. He was everything a kingdom could want. But there was a shadow hanging over this perfect prince. One day, during a simple child's game, that secret was dragged into the light. His tutor, William of Tyre, was watching Baldwin and his friends play. The game was a test of endurance. They were pinching and digging their nails into each other's arms to see who would cry out first. One by one, the boys yelped. But not Baldwin. He took it all without a sound, as if he felt nothing. Alarmed, William investigated further. He realized the boy couldn't feel anything in his right arm. As William later wrote, "It is impossible to refrain from tears while speaking of this great misfortune." Though doctors were hesitant to name it, the signs all pointed to one horrifying diagnosis: leprosy. For a medieval prince, this was a death sentence. The coronation of the damned. The diagnosis was a disaster for the court. Leprosy wasn't just a physical disease. Many saw it as a sign of God's displeasure, a curse that meant its victims should be cast out of society. While a knight with leprosy might join the Order of St. Lazarus, a military order of leper knights, he certainly wasn't expected to rule a kingdom. The future, already uncertain, now seemed to depend on a boy being slowly consumed by an incurable illness. Then, in 1174, fate intervened. King Amalric, Baldwin's father, died suddenly. The heir he worried so much about was now all the kingdom had. Just 4 days after his father's death, on the 75th anniversary of Jerusalem's capture, Baldwin was crowned King Baldwin III. He was only 13. Because of his age and his illness, a regent was appointed to rule for him, his kinsman Count Raymond III of Tripoli. For 2 years, Raymond governed while Baldwin grew into his role as king. But Baldwin refused to let his sickness define him. Even as he started losing feeling in his limbs, he was determined to be the monarch his people needed. He practiced riding endlessly, learning to control his horse with just his knees, since his hands could no longer grip the reins. His body was failing, but his will was made of iron. By 15, he was ready to rule on his own, just as the disease began to visibly mark his hands and face. The miracle at Montgisard. In 1177, the ultimate test came. Saladin, seeing a kingdom led by a 16-year-old with leprosy, figured this was his chance for a decisive blow. He marched from Egypt with a massive army of over 26,000 men, leaving the main crusader force busy in the north. He stormed through the countryside, heading straight for Jerusalem itself. The only thing standing in his way was King Baldwin. With the main army gone, Baldwin cobbled together a tiny force. A few hundred knights, including 80 elite Knights Templar, and a few thousand foot soldiers. He was hopelessly outnumbered. Saladin was so sure of his victory that he let his army spread out to plunder, thinking the boy king was helplessly trapped. He thought wrong. In a stunningly bold move, Baldwin broke out of the fortress of Ascalon and led his small army to intercept the Sultan. On November 25th, near a hill called Montgisard, the two armies collided. Saladin's forces were caught completely by surprise. What happened next became legend. Baldwin, his hands bandaged to hide his illness, ordered a relic, a piece of the true cross, to be raised. The young king got off his horse, fell to the ground, and prayed for victory. Then he rose and gave the order to charge. With their king leading the way, the Crusader knights smashed into the center of Saladin's unprepared army. The sheer ferocity of the attack created total chaos. The Ayyubid army, so confident just moments before, broke and fled. Saladin himself barely escaped, fleeing back to Cairo with just a fraction of his men. It was an impossible victory. The 16-year-old leper king had faced the most powerful ruler in the Muslim world and utterly humiliated him, cementing his reputation as a military genius. Section 4. A king's mind, a failing body. Montgisard was an incredible victory, but the war was far from over. Baldwin knew that one miracle wouldn't be enough to save his kingdom. His true strength wasn't just on the battlefield. He was a sharp and capable ruler. He appointed skilled advisors, not just yes-men, and navigated the treacherous politics of his court with a master's touch. He proved his strategic genius again and again. When Saladin later tried to trick him by attacking the southern border while secretly besieging the vital port of Beirut, Baldwin didn't fall for it. He knew Beirut was more important, moved his army north, and forced Saladin to retreat. His mind was his greatest weapon, even as his body continued to betray him. But the disease was relentless. By 1183, at just 22 years old, Baldwin was blind and bedridden. He could no longer ride. During one of Saladin's sieges on the castle of Kerak, the king, unable to walk, insisted on being carried to the front lines on a litter. The mere sight of their dying king was enough. His army rallied, and Saladin abandoned the siege upon their approach. Yet even as he defied Saladin, a different enemy was tearing his kingdom apart from the inside, the succession crisis. His leprosy meant he could never have an heir. Ambitious nobles were constantly scheming, positioning themselves for his inevitable death. The biggest threat was Guy of Lusignan, a newcomer who had married Baldwin's sister, Sibylla. Baldwin couldn't stand Guy, seeing him as reckless and incompetent. In a last-ditch effort to save his kingdom from Guy, Baldwin took a drastic step. In 1183, he had his 5-year-old nephew, also named Baldwin, crowned as co-king. Little Baldwin V, himself a sickly child, became the dynasty's last hope. Section 5. The Fall of the Sun. Having done everything he could, Baldwin IV's fight was almost over. In early 1185, he died. He was only 23. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the very heart of the kingdom he had spent his short, painful life defending. Even his enemies remembered him not for his illness, but for his incredible courage. To his people, he was a hero who, despite his suffering, had kept them safe. For a brief, brilliant decade, his will alone had held the kingdom of Jerusalem together. But his will couldn't protect it from beyond the grave. The tragedy he fought so hard to prevent happened with terrifying speed. His young nephew, King Baldwin V, died just a year later. The throne passed to his sister Sibylla, who immediately crowned the one man her brother had tried to stop, her husband, Guy of Lusignan. The result was a catastrophe. In 1187, just 2 years after Baldwin's death, Guy led the army into a disastrous trap at the Battle of Hattin. Saladin completely destroyed the Crusader forces. Soon after, Jerusalem itself fell. The kingdom that Baldwin had defended with his last breath was gone. Baldwin IV's story is one of those incredible pieces of history that feels like it's been pulled straight from a fantasy novel, but it's all true. If you love uncovering hidden stories of heroes who defied the odds, make sure you subscribe to see where our journey into the past takes us next. You can't help but wonder, if Baldwin had lived, could he have saved the kingdom? Many historians think so. His strategic mind and the sheer force of his will were the glue that held Jerusalem together. His life was a paradox, a king whose physical weakness hid an unbreakable spirit. His reign was a final brilliant flash of light before the darkness fell. It's why many still refer to him as the last great king of Jerusalem.